The glass spires of Thrissa did not fall silently. They screamed. It was a sound that vibrated in the marrow of Princess Kalia's bones, a high-pitched resonance of shattering crystal and bending metal that signaled the end of 10,000 years of history. She ran, not with the grace of the heir to the House of Virel, but with the desperate, scrambling terror of an animal hunted for sport. Her bare feet slapped against the obsidian pavement, slicing open on shards of the grand library that now littered the street like diamond dust. She wore the rough gray tunic of a scullery maid, snatched from a laundry line in the chaos. But the blood drying on her forehead was royal. It was the only thing she had left. Smoke, thick and purple-hued from the burning chemical plants, choked the air. Above, the sky was a tapestry of violence. Orbital destroyers, painted in the black and crimson colors of the insurrection, rained fire upon the capital. Every impact sent tremors through the ground, knocking Kalia into a jagged wall. She gasped, clutching her ribs. The pain was sharp, immediate, and grounding. It told her she was still alive. Varix. The name tasted like bile in her throat. Her cousin. The man who had sat at her father's table, who had toasted to her health at the solstice feast, had opened the planetary defense grid to the mercenaries. He had sold their world for a promise of power that would likely turn to ash in his hands. A dropship screeched overhead, its searchlight sweeping the ruins. Kalia pressed herself into the shadows of a collapsed archway. Her bioluminescent hair, usually a radiant curtain of starlight, was matted with grime and hidden beneath a coarse hood. But she feared the scanners would pick up her heat signature. She was the last loose end. The king was dead. The queen was dead. Varix could not claim the throne while Kalia breathed. She forced her legs to move. She had to reach the western spaceport. It was a fool's errand. The port would be locked down, swarming with Varix's kill squads. But the alternative was to lie down and die here among the wreckage of her life. She turned a corner and skidded to a halt. 3 soldiers in powered armor stood between her and the alleyway exit. They were not Thrissan. They were off-worlders, mercenaries with faceless helmets and heavy plasma rifles. They saw her instantly. "Target acquired," one of them said, his voice amplified and metallic. Kalia stepped back, her hand instinctively going to the ceremonial dagger hidden at her waist. It was a pathetic defense against plasma fire. She straightened her spine. If she was to die, she would die standing, even in a maid's tunic. The lead soldier raised his weapon. The barrel glowed with a lethal blue light. Then the wall to their right exploded. It was not a bomb. It was a battering ram of sheer kinetic force. A figure burst through the masonry, wrapped in the heavy matte black combat armor of the Terran coalition. The newcomer did not hesitate. He moved with a brutality that was terrifying to witness. He slammed into the nearest mercenary, the impact sounding like a thunderclap, and drove a combat knife through the gap in the enemy's neck armor. The other 2 turned, but they were too slow. The Terran spun, a kinetic pistol in his left hand barking twice, 2 clean shots, 2 bodies hitting the ground. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 seconds. The dark figure straightened and turned toward her, the visor of his helmet retracted, revealing a face she knew better than she cared to admit. A square jaw, a scar running through his left eyebrow, and eyes the color of slate. Orion Cade, her diplomatic guard, the human her father had hired to modernize their security protocols. "Princess," Orion said. His voice was rough, calm, and utterly incongruous with the slaughter he had just performed. "We are leaving. Now." Kalia stared at him, her chest heaving. I thought you were with the details at the Senate. I thought—" "Dead." Orion cut in. "The whole detail is dead. Varix's men didn't bother with arrests. He stepped forward, grabbing her arm. His grip was iron, bruising but undeniably secure. He did not bow. He did not ask permission. He hauled her toward the hole he had made in the wall. "My ship is 3 blocks east, hidden in a cargo bay," Orion said, pulling her into a run. "It is taking fire, but the engines are hot. Keep your head down and do not stop moving." They ran. Kalia had thought she was running before, but this was different. Orion set a punishing pace, navigating the debris with a soldier's instinct. He shoved her behind cover seconds before a patrol skimmer strafed the street. He shielded her body with his own when a fuel line exploded nearby, the heat searing the air around them. "Why?" she gasped as they scrambled over a pile of fallen statuary. "Why are you doing this?" Orion did not look back. He fired 3 shots at a rooftop sniper, suppressing the enemy long enough for them to cross an intersection. "The contract stands. Princess. My job is to keep you breathing." They reached the cargo bay. It was a cavernous structure, half collapsed, the roof peeling away like dead skin. Inside sat a Terran freighter, a blocky, ugly thing compared to the elegant solar sails of Thrissan yachts. It was scarred with scorch marks and leaking hydraulic fluid from a rupture in the landing strut. "Get in," Orion ordered, shoving her toward the lowering ramp. Kalia scrambled up the metal grate, her bare feet slipping on the oil. Orion followed, firing blindly behind him as laser fire erupted from the bay entrance. He hit the ramp controls, and the hydraulics whined in protest as the door sealed them in. "Strap in," Orion shouted, throwing himself into the pilot's seat. Kalia fell into the co-pilot's chair, fumbling with the harness. The ship lurched. The roar of the engines drowned out the sound of the city dying outside. Gravity slammed into her chest as Orion punched the throttle. The ship tore through the hangar roof, debris bouncing off the shields. They shot upward, a jagged streak of gray against the smoke. Alarms screamed in the cockpit. Red lights flashed across the console. "Shields at 40%, Orion muttered, his hands flying across the controls. "Hang on. This is going to get rough." They broke the cloud layer. The blackness of space awaited, but it was not empty. The blockade was a net of steel and laser fire. Orion flew like a madman, rolling the heavy freighter between the debris of destroyed Thrissan defense platforms. The ship groaned, metal shrieking under the strain of the maneuvers. A frigate turned its turrets toward them. A lance of green energy slashed through the void, missing their starboard wing by less than 100 yards. Orion slammed the nav computer, calculating jump coordinates. 3 seconds. The ship shook violently as a glancing blow took out their communication array. Kalia gripped the armrests until her knuckles turned white. 2 seconds later, Orion grunted through gritted teeth. Another impact. Sparks showered down from the ceiling. 1. The stars elongated. The sickening lurch of hyperspace grabbed them, twisting their stomachs. Then the burning world of Thrissa vanished, replaced by the swirling tunnel of faster-than-light travel. Silence slammed back into the cockpit. The alarms died to a rhythmic pulsing. Orion exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. He flipped a few switches, stabilizing the drive, then spun his chair around. "Are you injured?" he asked. Kalia did not answer. She stared at the empty blackness of the view screen, where her home had been seconds ago. Slowly, her trembling fingers undid the harness. She stood up, her legs shaking so bad she had to hold onto the console. She looked at the display. The rear sensors were still buffering the last image recorded before the jump. It flickered onto the screen. Thrissa. Her jewel. The crystalline cities were glowing, but not with their inner light. They were glowing with the fires of orbital bombardment. The tectonic plates were cracking under the assault. As she watched the frozen image, she saw the great spire, the seat of her family for 500 generations, crumble into dust. Kalia made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a scream. Her knees gave out. She expected to hit the metal deck. Instead, she hit the hard composite of armor. Orion had moved faster than a human should. He caught her, lowering her gently to the floor. She buried her face in her hands, the grime and blood smearing across her cheeks. The grief was a physical weight, crushing her lungs, her family, her friends, the court, the gardens where she had learned to walk. All of it. Gone. Orion said nothing. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell her it would be all right. He simply sat on the floor with her, his armored back against the pilot's console, and held her. One of his large hands rested on the back of her head, shielding her from the world. Kalia wept until her throat was raw. She wept for the mother who had brushed her hair that morning. She wept for the father who had kissed her forehead. She wept for the people who were burning because her cousin wanted a crown. As she shook, something fell from the folds of her tunic. It hit the deck with a dull clatter. It was a small, decorative circlet, not the heavy crown of state, but the delicate band she wore for private functions. It had melted in the heat of the fire she had run through. The gems fused into a lump of blackened slag. Kalia stared at it through her tears. It was ugly, ruined. Just like me, she thought. Orion saw her looking at it. He reached out and covered the ruined crown with his hand, pushing it aside, drawing her attention back to the steady rise and fall of his breathing. He remained a silent anchor in a universe that had just lost its gravity. The memory of their first meeting drifted through the haze of her exhaustion, a sharp contrast to the smell of ozone and sweat that now filled the ship. It was 4 months ago, the reception hall of the summer palace. Everything was white and gold, the air perfumed with lilacs from the hydroponic gardens. Kalia had stood on the dais, stiff in her formal robes, her face painted in the traditional silver markings of her station. "This is Captain Orion Cade," her father had said, introducing the human. "He comes highly recommended by the Terran Coalition. He will oversee your personal detail during the trade negotiations." Kalia had looked down at him. He was wearing a dress uniform that looked uncomfortable on his broad frame. He stood at attention, his eyes fixed on a point just above her head. He seemed cold, efficient, a weapon in a suit. "I do not require a nursemaid." "Father," she had said, her voice cool. "It is not a request." "Kalia," the king had replied gently. Orion had not reacted to her dismissal. He had simply bowed, a sharp military motion. "It is an honor, Your Highness. I will endeavor to be invisible." And he had been, for weeks. She barely noticed him. He was a shadow at the edge of her vision. Until the day of the garden party, a young serving girl, nervous and trembling, had tripped while carrying a tray of heavy crystal flutes. It happened right in front of the visiting dignitaries. The tray tipped. Kalia had moved before she thought, catching the tray with a reflex born of dance training, steadying the girl with her other hand. She saved the glasses, but wine splashed onto the hem of her priceless silk robe. The chamberlain had descended on the girl like a hawk, screeching about incompetence. The girl was terrified, tears welling in her eyes. Kalia had silenced the chamberlain with a look. It was my fault. She had lied smoothly, her voice projecting so the dignitaries could hear. I bumped into her. Clumsy. See that she is not reprimanded. She dismissed the girl with a kind smile and continued the conversation as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, as she walked the perimeter of the terrace, she found Orion standing guard by the ivy trellis. He was looking at her differently. The coldness was gone, replaced by a thoughtful appraisal. "Good reflexes, Your Highness," he had said. Kalia had paused. "I hate to see waste. The crystal is expensive." Orion had smiled then, a small, fleeting expression that transformed his face. "You didn't catch the tray to save the crystal. You caught it to save the girl." Kalia had stiffened, unused to being seen so clearly. "Do not presume to know my mind, Captain. I am paid to observe." "Princess," he had replied softly, "and I see more than the mask." It was the first time anyone had looked at her and seen a woman, not a title. The thud of landing gear hitting solid ground jolted Kalia back to the present. She groaned, shifting in the co-pilot's seat. Her body ached in places she didn't know existed. Outside the viewport, a bleak, gray landscape stretched out to the horizon. Rain lashed against the glass, heavy and relentless. "Where are we?" she rasped. Her throat felt like it was full of sand. "Sector 7, Orion replied. He was flipping switches, powering down the main drive. "A mining moon called Ixion. It's abandoned. The atmosphere is breathable, but barely. The storms are frequent." "Why here?" "Because it's nowhere," Orion said, unbuckling his harness. "And right now, nowhere is the safest place for you." He stood up and moved to the rear of the cockpit, opening a locker. He pulled out a medical kit and a ration bar, tossing the food to her. "Eat." Kalia looked at the bar. It was a block of compressed protein, flavorless and dry. She felt a surge of irrational anger. She had lost her world. She was covered in blood. And he was tossing food at her like she was a stray dog. She didn't catch it. The bar hit her chest and fell to the floor. Orion paused, looking at the fallen ration. Then he looked at her. "Pick it up, Kalia," he said quietly. "No." She glared at him, her eyes burning. "Take me back." Orion sighed, running a hand through his short, dark hair. "Take you back where? There is no back. Thrissa is gone. We have allies," she shouted, the sudden volume startling even herself. "The Senate. The Senate is compromised." Orion's voice rose to match hers. "Who do you think gave Varix the codes? Who do you think disabled the orbital grid? If I take you to any official outpost, you will be dead within the hour." "Then why are you still here?" she demanded, standing up. She swayed, dizzy, but held her ground. "You are a mercenary. You follow the gold. There is no one left to pay you. Orion, my father is dead. The treasury is seized. You are risking your life for a ghost." Orion stepped closer, his presence filling the small space. "Do you think I'm here for the money?" "Yes, why else? Pity? I do not want your pity." She pushed him. It was a weak, ineffectual shove against his armored chest. But she put all her frustration into it. "I should be with my people. I should have died with them. You would have died for nothing." Orion grabbed her wrists, stopping her from striking him again. He held her fast, forcing her to look at him. "And I am not here for money." "Then why?" she screamed, struggling against his grip. "Because I disobeyed." He roared back. The confession hung in the air, silencing the hum of the ship's cooling systems. Kalia stopped fighting. She stared at him, her chest heaving. "What?" "My orders were to stand down," Orion said, his voice dropping to a rough growl. When the attack started, the Terran command ordered all diplomatic personnel to evacuate immediately. We were told it was an internal Thrissan matter. We were told not to interfere. He released her wrists, stepping back as if the contact burned him. "I was on the evac shuttle. Kalia, I was strapped in. I was safe." Kalia watched him, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. And then I saw the palace shields fall. Orion continued, looking away from her, staring at the rain-streaked window. I knew you were still inside. I knew what Varix would do to you. He looked back at her, his eyes intense, burning with a fierce, terrifying loyalty. So I got off the shuttle. I knocked out a guard, stole a loader mech, and broke into the armory. I deserted Kalia. I am a traitor to the Coalition. I have a bounty on my head the size of a moon now. So do not tell me I am here for the gold. Kalia stared at him, stunned. He had thrown away his career, his citizenship, his life, for her. Why? She whispered. Orion didn't answer. He clenched his jaw, turning back to the medical kit. Sit down. I need to clean that cut on your head before it gets infected. The tension in the ship was thick, suffocating. Kalia sat. She let him clean the wound. She let him apply the stinging antiseptic. But her mind was racing, trying to reconcile the mercenary she thought she knew with the man who had destroyed his own life to save hers. 2 days passed on the moon. The ship was a cramped cage. The air recyclers hummed with a rhythmic, grating noise. Outside, the rain never stopped. It was a deluge of biblical proportions, hammering against the hull like thousands of tiny fists. Kalia felt like she was unraveling. She paced the small cargo hold, her mind replaying the fall of Thrissa on a loop. The guilt was a physical sickness. She was the princess. She should have seen it coming. She should have stopped Varix. Orion spent most of his time in the engine room, repairing the hyperdrive stabilizers. He gave her space, but she could feel his eyes on her whenever she entered the room. Watchful, protective. On the third night, the storm intensified. Thunder shook the ground, vibrating through the landing struts. Lightning turned the gray sky into blinding sheets of white. Kalia couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. The air in the ship tasted stale, recycled, dead. She hit the release on the airlock. Orion's voice came over the comms from the engine room. Kalia, don't open that. The atmospheric pressure is dropping. It's a cyclonic event. She didn't listen. She needed air. She needed to feel something other than the numbness of grief. She punched the override. The ramp hissed and lowered. The wind hit her like a physical blow. It screamed, tearing at her clothes, whipping her hair around her face. The rain was freezing, soaking her to the bone in seconds. Kalia stumbled down the ramp and onto the muddy surface of the moon. The mud sucked at her bare feet. The cold was shocking, painful. Kalia, Orion shouted from the ship. She ignored him. She walked out into the storm, spreading her arms wide. The wind threatened to knock her over, then she looked up at the swirling black clouds, letting the freezing water wash the dried blood from her skin. Why? She screamed at the sky. Why did you take them? Why did you leave me? The wind swallowed her voice. It was indifferent to her pain. The universe did not care that she was a princess. It did not care that her heart was broken. She fell to her knees in the mud. She was nothing, just flesh and bone on a dead rock. Take me, she shrieked, clawing at the ground. Take me too! Hands grabbed her shoulders. Orion was there, unarmored, wearing only his flight suit. He was instantly soaked, his hair plastered to his skull. He hauled her up from the mud, his grip bruising. Get inside! Are you insane? You'll die out here! Let me die! Kalia fought him, striking at his chest with muddy fists. I have nothing! I am nothing! You are alive! Orion shouted, shaking her. I don't want to be! She collapsed against him, her strength failing. The cold was seeping into her heart. Every beat was a struggle. Orion didn't argue. He swept her up into his arms, cradling her against his chest. He turned and marched back up the ramp, fighting the wind that tried to tear them apart. He carried her into the airlock and hit the seal. The ramp hissed shut, cutting off the roar of the storm. Silence returned, heavy and wet. Orion didn't put her down immediately. He stood there, breathing hard, water dripping from his nose and chin onto her face. He looked down at her, his expression a mixture of anger and terrifying relief. "You don't get to quit," he rasped, "not after what it cost to get you here." Kalia looked up at him. She was shivering violently, her teeth chattering, her bioluminescent hair, triggered by the adrenaline and the proximity of his body, began to glow. It started as a faint pulse, a soft teal light that illuminated the water droplets on his skin. She saw the fear in his eyes. Not fear of the storm, but fear of losing her. Her emotional wall, the royal composure she had worn like armor since birth, finally shattered completely. She reached up, her cold fingers touching the warmth of his neck. "I have no kingdom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have no family, and I have no name." Orion tightened his hold on her. "You are Kalia." She shook her head, tears mixing with the rain on her face. She leaned her forehead against his chest, listening to the frantic rhythm of his heart. It was beating for her. "I lost everything in the war," she breathed, the confession tearing itself from her soul. She looked up, meeting his slate-gray eyes. "Except you." Orion went still. The words hung between them, heavier than the storm outside. He didn't pull away. For a moment, the soldier vanished, and there was only the man, holding the woman he had sacrificed everything to save. "We need to get you dry," he said roughly, his voice dropping an octave, but he didn't move. He held her for a moment longer, as if he was the one who needed the anchor. Trillions of miles away, the air was dry and smelled of sterile filtration. Deep Space Station Omega-9 sat in the void between galaxies, a neutral ground for those who preferred to operate in the shadows. In a darkened room, a holographic table flickered to life. 4 figures appeared, their faces obscured by digital distortion. The target escaped Thrissa, a voice said. It was smooth, synthetic, impossible. A second voice replied. The bombardment was total. Scanners picked up a Terran freighter breaking blockade moments before the grid fell. It matches the signature of the vessel assigned to the diplomat Orion Cade. Cade is a deserter, and he has the girl. A silence fell over the council. "She cannot be allowed to rally the exiles," the first voice said. "Varix has the throne, but his claim is weak as long as Varel lives. The bloodline must be severed. Authorize the hunters." The third voice commanded, "High priority, dead or alive, preferably dead. It's cleaner." The hologram flickered. "Find them, burn them, and bring me her head. I want to be sure the galaxy knows the war is truly over." The transmission cut. The room returned to darkness, save for the cold, blinking light of a star map, zooming in on the remote, storm-racked sector where a single ship was hiding in the rain. The heavy transport freighter, christened the Iron Lung by a crew with a grim sense of humor. Smelled of recycled air, engine grease, and unwashed humanity. It was a massive, lumbering beast of a ship, designed to haul terraforming equipment across the dark sectors at Tatarin. But in reality, it hauled anything that paid. Currently, that included a belly full of refugees, mercenaries, and 2 fugitives trying very hard to disappear. Princess Kalia of House Varel sat on a crate in the corner of the loading bay, her knees pulled up to her chest. She looked nothing like the heiress who had once worn gowns woven from spider silk and light. She wore a mechanic's jumpsuit that was 3 sizes too big, stained with oil and smelling of sulfur. Her face, usually radiant with the faint bioluminescence of her people, was smeared with engine grime to dull the glow. A heavy woolen cap was pulled low over her head, hiding the shimmering, nervous tendrils of her hair. She watched Orion Cade across the bay. He was arguing with a Rhodian scavenger, a creature with chitinous skin and a collection of illegal salvage spread out on a blanket. Orion looked different too. He had ditched his matte black combat armor for the rough canvas jacket and trousers of a drift worker. He looked tired. The shadows under his eyes were dark, bruises of exhaustion that no amount of adrenaline could hide. 50 credits is robbery, Orion said, his voice low and hard. The hyperdrive coupling is second-hand. It has stress fractures. The scavenger chattered something in a clicking dialect, waving 2 of his forearms dismissively. 30, Orion countered, leaning in. And you throw in a coolant flush. Kalia looked away, feeling a knot of shame tighten in her stomach. Her bodyguard, a man who had commanded battalions, was now haggling over junk parts so they could limp their damaged ship to the next system. Their vessel, the Vagabond, was stowed in the freighter's lower hold, a broken bird hiding in the belly of a whale. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. Every moment she sat here, she felt the weight of her survival. It was a stolen thing. Orion returned 10 minutes later, carrying a heavy, grease-stained metal component wrapped in rags. He sat down next to her on the crate, exhaling a long breath. "We have the part," he said quietly. "It will take me a few hours to install it once the bay is clear. Until then, we wait." Kalia looked at him. "You overpaid." Orion shrugged, unwrapping a ration bar and breaking it in half. He handed her the larger piece. He knew we were desperate. "It is the tax on desperation. Eat." She took the food, though it tasted like cardboard. "Are we safe here?" "Safe is a relative term," Orion murmured, his eyes scanning the cavernous bay. "The Iron Lung is a smuggler's haven. The captain doesn't ask questions as long as the credits are clear. But keep your head down, and keep that hat on. If anyone sees your hair, the game is over." Kalia touched the edge of the wool cap. Her hair was her people's most distinct feature, a responsive living extension of their nervous system. It was a curse now. "I hate this," she whispered, hiding like a rat. Orion chewed slowly, swallowing before he spoke. "Rats survive, Kalia. Lions die in cages. Be a rat for now." The mess hall of the Iron Lung was a chaotic assault on the senses. It was crowded with a mix of species that would have made the Royal Protocol droids short-circuit. Mercenaries sharpened knives at one table, while void miners gambled with magnetic chips at another. The air was thick with the smoke of narcotic vapor sticks and the smell of fried protein. Kalia and Orion sat at a small table near the back, nursing tin cups of synthetic kaf. Orion sat with his back to the wall, his eyes constantly moving, tracking the exits, the flow of people, the threats. Kalia tried to mimic his posture, tried to look like she belonged in this underworld. But she felt painfully conspicuous. She had been raised to walk with her head high, to command attention. Slouching felt like a physical deformity. A group of loud, boisterous haulers sat at the adjacent table. They were human, rough men with skin weathered by radiation and hard labor. One of them, a man with a thick beard and a lazy eye, kept glancing at Kalia. She looked down at her drink, willing herself to be invisible. "Hey, pretty thing," the man called out. His voice was slurred, heavy with cheap liquor. "You're too quiet for a grease monkey. Why don't you come sit with us? We've got real whiskey." Kalia froze. She did not know the script for this. In the court of Thrissa, if a man wished to speak to her, he submitted a formal request 3 weeks in advance. "Ignore him," Orion said softly, his hand resting on the table, inches from hers. "Don't make eye contact." The man took her silence as a challenge. He stood up, swaying slightly, and walked over to their table. He loomed over her, smelling of stale alcohol and sweat. "I'm talking to you, sweetheart." The man grunted. He reached out, his dirty fingers aiming for the edge of her cap. "What are you hiding under there? Some kind of scar, or are you just shy?" Kalia flinched away. But the man was fast. He hooked a finger under the rim of her hat and tugged. The cap slipped. A lock of her hair tumbled out. In the dim light of the mess hall, it should have been beautiful. But Kalia was terrified, and her hair reacted to her fear, turning a dull, flat gray. It did not glow. To the drunk hauler, it just looked like strange, foreign fibers. He laughed. "Look at that. You got tentacles for hair. Girl, what are you, some kind of squid?" He reached out again, this time grabbing the lock of hair. The moment his skin touched the strands, Kalia felt a jolt of revulsion that was almost electric. In Thrissan culture, touching another's hair was an act of supreme intimacy, reserved only for a bonded mate or a parent. It was a biological connection, a sharing of light and soul. To be touched by a stranger was a violation. Orion started to rise, his chair scraping against the floor, his face darkening with lethal intent. But Kalia moved first. She did not think. She did not calculate political ramifications. She reacted with the primal instinct of a creature cornered. She stood up, planting her feet as her combat instructors had taught her in the sparring ring she had treated as a game, and drove her fist into the man's nose. There was a sickening crunch of cartilage. The man reeled back, blood spurting from his broken nose. He tripped over his own feet and crashed into the neighboring table, sending drinks and gambling chips flying. The mess hall went silent. Kalia stood there, her chest heaving, her fist throbbing. She stared at the man groaning on the floor. Orion was staring at her. His mouth was slightly open. The man's friends stood up, knocking their chairs over. "She hit Jinx," one of them shouted, reaching for a stun baton on his belt. Orion was in motion before the shout ended. He stepped in front of Kalia, his posture shifting from tired refugee to combat-ready soldier. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He simply projected an aura of violence so palpable that the haulers hesitated. "She doesn't understand your customs," Orion said, his voice flat and cold. He touched her. She touched him back. "We call that square." The lead hauler looked at Orion, sizing him up. He saw the scar on Orion's brow, the way he stood balanced on the balls of his feet, the stillness of a predator. He looked at his friend bleeding on the floor. "Take your squid and get out of here," the hauler spat, helping his friend up. "Before we space the both of you," Orion didn't wait for a second invitation. He grabbed Kalia's arm, pulled her cap back down over her hair, and marched her out of the mess hall. They didn't stop until they were 3 corridors away, in a quiet service tunnel. Orion pinned her against the bulkhead, not aggressively, but with an urgency that made her breath hitch. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. "He touched me," Kalia hissed back, her eyes blazing. "He put his hands on my neural strands. He was a drunk idiot." Orion raked a hand through his hair, exasperated. "You don't punch a drunk in a place like this unless you want to start a riot. You almost blew our cover. I will not be handled like livestock. Orion, I may be a fugitive, but I am not property." Orion looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the royal indignation that no amount of dirt could hide. And then, a small, reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That was a solid right hook," he admitted. Kalia blinked, the anger draining out of her, replaced by a sudden confusion. You think so?" Orion nodded. "You pivoted from the hip. Good form. But next time, let me handle diplomacy. My fists are harder." The mood shifted an hour later. They were moving through the common market deck, looking for a hydration pack to replace the leaking one in their ship. A large holographic screen dominated the center of the plaza, usually broadcasting trade routes or weather warnings. Now, it was broadcasting the face of Varix. Kalia froze. She felt Orion tense beside her. Varix stood on the podium of the Galactic Senate, wearing the white and gold robes of the High Steward. He looked mournful, a tragic hero bearing the weight of a tragedy he had engineered. Citizens of the galaxy, Varix's voice boomed, amplified across the deck. It is with a heavy heart that I confirm the destruction of the Thrissan capital. The investigation is complete. The catastrophic failure of the planetary defense grid was not an accident. It was sabotage. The image on the screen changed. It showed a grainy, doctored video of Kalia entering the defense control room. It showed her inputting codes. It showed the grid falling. Princess Kalia, in a bid to seize absolute power from her father, deactivated our shields to allow her mercenary allies to strike. Varix lied, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. She intended to rule over the ashes. Instead, she destroyed us all. She is a traitor to her blood, a war criminal, and a danger to every civilized system. The crowd on the market deck murmured. Words like monster and patricide floated through the air. Kalia felt as though the gravity generator had been turned up to 10 times its normal strength. She couldn't breathe. The lie was so absolute, so monstrous, that it stole her voice. She saw herself on the screen, her face, her codes twisted into a narrative of pure evil. She did it? A woman near them whispered. That pretty little thing killed her own parents. They should hang her, a man replied. Kalia took a step toward the screen. A scream of denial clawed at her throat. She wanted to tear the screen down. She wanted to burn Varix until he screamed the truth. Orion's hand clamped onto her shoulder. It was a vice grip. Don't! He breathed into her ear. He killed them. She choked out, tears of rage streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the grease. He killed them, and he is blaming me. I know, Orion said, pulling her back, turning her away from the screen. I know, but you cannot fight him here. Not today. He dragged her away from the light of the screen, back into the shadows of the corridor. Kalia stumbled, her vision blurred. She felt a hatred so pure it scared her. It was a cold, dark thing, coiling around her heart. I will kill him, she vowed, her voice a broken whisper. I will tear his house down stone by stone. Orion didn't say she wouldn't. He didn't tell her vengeance was empty. He just kept moving, placing his body between her and the world that wanted her dead. Back in the cramped quarters they had rented, a metal box with 2 bunks and a single light strip. The silence was heavy. Kalia sat on the edge of the lower bunk. She had removed the heavy jacket, revealing the thin undershirt she wore beneath. There was a tear in the fabric near her shoulder blade, and blood was seeping through. You're bleeding, Orion said. He was standing by the door, checking the lock for the 3rd time. It's nothing, she muttered. I scraped it on the hatch when we were running. Orion grabbed the med kit from his pack. Turn around. I can do it myself. Turn around. Kalia. She sighed and turned her back to him. She heard him opening the kit, the snap of sterile gloves. She felt the fabric of her shirt being peeled away from the wound. It's a jagged cut, Orion said, his voice clinical but soft. Needs cleaning and a seal patch. This will sting. He applied the antiseptic, Kalia hissed, her back arching instinctively. Sorry, he murmured. His hands were rough, calloused from years of holding rifles and controls, but his touch was incredibly gentle. He cleaned the blood away with meticulous patience. As he worked, the distance between them seemed to vanish. Kalia could feel the heat of his body radiating against her back. She could hear his breathing, slow and steady, in the chaos of the last week, in the horror of the war. This was the first moment of stillness she had found. She closed her eyes. The pain of the wound faded, replaced by a different kind of awareness. She was acutely aware of his fingers brushing her skin as he applied the patch. "There," Orion said, "good as new." He didn't pull his hand away immediately. His fingers lingered for a fraction of a second on her shoulder. Kalia shivered. It wasn't from the cold. She turned around slowly. Orion was close. Too close. He was kneeling on the floor to be at eye level with her seated position. His slate-gray eyes were dark, searching her face. He looked at the grime on her cheek, the exhaustion in her posture, and something softened in his expression. "You should sleep," he said. Kalia didn't move. The air between them felt charged, electric. The memory of the hair-touching incident in the mess hall came back to her. He had defended her honor with a violence that thrilled and terrified her. "Orion," she whispered. "Yeah? Why did you stay?" "Really?" Orion looked down at his hands, then back up at her. "We've been over this." "No," she said, leaning in slightly. "You said you disobeyed orders, but you didn't say why. You could have flown away. You could be halfway to Earth by now." Orion held her gaze. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words. "I couldn't leave you," he said simply. "It wasn't a choice. It was gravity." Kalia's breath caught. She looked at his lips, then up to his eyes. She saw the hunger there, buried deep beneath layers of duty and discipline. She leaned closer. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wanted to bridge the gap. She wanted to feel something other than grief. Orion didn't pull away. He went still, waiting, letting her choose. Her face was inches from his. She could smell the soap he used, the faint metallic scent of the ship. Then, the image of Varix on the screen flashed in her mind. The accusation. Traitor. If she kissed him, she would accept this new life. She was accepting that the princess was dead and this fugitive was all that remained. She pulled back. She saw the hurt flash in Orion's eyes, quickly masked by his soldier's stoicism. He stood up immediately, clearing his throat. "Get some rest, princess," he said, his voice tight. "I'll take the first watch." That night, the ship hummed with the vibrations of deep space travel. Kalia lay in the bottom bunk, staring at the metal slats of the bunk above her. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fire. She rolled over. Orion was sitting in the single chair by the door, his arms crossed over his chest, his head tipped back against the wall. He was asleep, or at least dozing. His laser pistol was in his lap, his hand resting loosely on the grip. Kalia moved silently. She slipped out of the bunk and crept across the small room. She stood over him. In sleep. The lines of tension on his face smoothed out. He looked younger. He looked like the man he might have been if the universe hadn't turned him into a weapon. She reached out, her hand hovering near his face. She wanted to touch the scar on his eyebrow. She wanted to wake him and tell him she was sorry for pulling away. She wanted to tell him that he was the only thing keeping her from shattering into a million pieces. Her fingertips brushed the stubble on his jaw. He didn't stir, but she stopped. "I am poison," she thought. "Everyone I love dies. My parents, my kingdom. If I let him love me, I will kill him too." She pulled her hand back, clutching it to her chest. It was better to be alone than to be the architect of his destruction. The attack happened at 300 hours. There was no warning, no alarm. just the sound of the magnetic lock on their cabin door being overridden with a bypass decoder. Orion was awake before the door slid open. He didn't gasp or fumble. He moved with the terrifying speed of a man who lived in a state of constant readiness. He kicked the chair aside and raised his pistol. The door hissed open. A silhouette filled the frame. It was the trader who had sold them the parts earlier. The Rhodian. But he wasn't holding scrap metal. He was holding a thermal detonator. "Bounty!" the Rhodian shrieked, priming the grenade. "Down!" Orion roared. He didn't fire. Shooting the Rhodian would drop the grenade in the room. Instead, Orion launched himself at the alien. He tackled the creature, driving them both back out into the corridor. Kalia scrambled out of the bunk, her heart stopping. "Orion!" The corridor erupted in chaos. Orion and the Rhodian were grappling on the metal grating. The thermal detonator skittered across the floor, its red light blinking. 3, 2. Orion kicked Rhodian away and dove for the grenade. He grabbed it and hurled it down the adjacent service chute. He rolled back toward the room just as the chute exploded. Boom! The ship shook. Smoke and fire billowed out of the service vent. The concussion wave slammed Kalia against the wall. Orion was on his feet instantly, coughing, his face smeared with soot. The Rhodian was dazed, trying to reach for a blaster pistol on the floor. Kalia saw it. She saw the blaster. She saw Orion's back turned as he checked on her. "Look out!" she screamed. She grabbed the heavy metal water canister from the table and threw it. It wasn't a graceful throw, but it was desperate. It hit Rhodian in the head with a hollow clang. The alien slumped, unconscious. Orion spun around, weapon raised, ready to kill. He saw the Rhodian out cold. He saw Kalia trembling, her hands still outstretched from the throw. He lowered the gun. He moved to the door control and jammed the lock, sealing them in. "We have to move," he said, his voice ragged. "The explosion will bring security." He turned to her. "Are you hurt?" Kalia stared at him. He was bleeding from a cut on his cheek. His jacket was signed. He had almost died. Because she had hesitated. Because they were staying in one place too long. "You almost died," she whispered. "Occupational hazard." He grunted, grabbing their packs. "Let's go." "No." She grabbed his lapels, yanking him toward her. She was furious. Furious at the Rhodian, at Varix, but mostly at herself for wasting time on fear. "You almost died," she repeated, her voice rising to a sob. "You promised you would keep me safe. I am keeping you safe. By getting blown up, by taking grenades for me." "Yes." "That is the job." Kalia looked at him, seeing the absolute resolve in his eyes. He really would die for her. He wouldn't hesitate. The fear that had held her back earlier snapped. The dam broke. She didn't think about duty or poison or the future. She only knew that he was alive, and she was alive, and she needed him like she needed air. She kissed him. It wasn't a gentle storybook kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate, terrified, and hungry. She pressed her body against his, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him down. She tasted the smoke on his skin and the blood on his lip. Orion stiffened for a heartbeat, stunned. Then, he groaned, a low sound in his throat, and his arms wrapped around her. He kissed her back with a ferocity that matched hers. He lifted her off her feet, pressing her against the sealed door. Kalia's markings flared to life. Her hair, hidden beneath the cap, began to glow with a blinding intensity, the light seeping through the wool fabric, bathing them in a soft azure radiance. She felt the connection, the electric hum of two souls crashing together. For a moment, the war didn't exist. Varix didn't exist. There was only this. Then, reality came crashing back. The sound of boots pounding down the corridor, shouting voices, security. Kalia pulled back, gasping for air. Her eyes were wide, her pupils dilated. She looked at Orion, at his swollen lip, at the raw need in his eyes. She realized what she had done. She had crossed the line. She had taken his loyalty and twisted it into something that would destroy him. She stammered, backing away. I can't. Orion reached for her. Kalia, no. She shook her head, terror flooding her chest. I can't do this. I can't make you love me. It's a death sentence. She turned away, grabbing her pack, hiding her face so he wouldn't see the tears. We have to go, she said, her voice cold, shutting the door on the heat that still radiated between them. Security is coming. Orion stood there for a second, his hand still raised, reaching for a woman who was already running away. Then, the soldier took over. He clenched his jaw, holstered his weapon, and nodded. Right behind you, princess. They fled into the dark bowels of the ship, the echo of the kiss still burning on their lips. Louder than the sirens wailing around them, Zarnix was a world that had forgotten the warmth of a sun. It was a sphere of jagged ice and howling winds, orbiting a dying white dwarf star that cast a pale, anemic light over the glaciers. The vagabond descended through the atmosphere, shaking violently as the gale force winds battered its hull. Orion fought the controls, his knuckles white. The nav computer was screaming warnings about wind shear, but he ignored them, forcing the heavy freighter down toward a set of coordinates that did not officially exist. Kalia sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring out at the blinding whiteness. She wore a heavy thermal parka over her mechanic's jumpsuit, but the cold seemed to radiate through the metal of the ship itself. She was not trembling from the temperature, however. She was trembling because this was the end of the line. If Admiral Harith turned them away, there was nowhere left to go. We are coming in hot. Orion grunted, firing the landing thrusters. The ship slammed onto the ice shelf, sliding sideways for 300 yards before the magnetic clamps engaged, digging into the permafrost. The engines whined down, replaced by the roar of the wind outside. Orion unbuckled his harness and looked at her. His face was grim. Stay behind me, he said. Harith was loyal to your father, but desperate men do desperate things. We do not know who is waiting behind that airlock. They suited up in heavy excursion gear, covering their faces with rebreather masks to filter the thin, freezing air. The cargo ramp lowered, and they stepped out into the blizzard. Visibility was less than 5 feet. Kalia followed the dark shape of Orion's back, trudging through knee-deep snow toward a sheer cliff face. There was nothing there but ice and rock. Then, a section of the cliff groaned and slid aside. A dozen soldiers in white camouflage armor emerged from the darkness of the tunnel. Weapons raised. They were Thrissan exiles, their bioluminescence dimmed by the cold and defeat. Halt, the lead soldier commanded. Kalia pulled down her rebreather mask. The cold bit at her exposed skin, but she needed them to see her face. She stood tall, channeling every ounce of royal training she possessed. I am Princess Kalia of House Varel, she shouted over the wind. I seek Admiral Harith. The soldiers hesitated. They looked at her, then at the human mercenary standing beside her with his hand hovering near his pistol. The lead soldier lowered his rifle slowly. The Admiral is expecting you. The base was carved deep into the mountain, a labyrinth of tunnels heated by geothermal vents. It smelled of ozone, unwashed bodies, and desperation. This was not a proud army. It was a collection of ghosts hiding in the dark. Admiral Harith sat behind a metal desk in a command center that flickered with dying power cells. He was an old Thrissan, his skin the color of bruised violet, his once bright markings faded to a dull gray. He did not stand when Kalia entered. So, he said, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "The rumors are true. The last Varel lives." Kalia stepped forward. "Admiral, I have come to call upon your oath. My cousin has usurped the throne. I need your fleet." Harith laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. "My fleet? Princess, look around you. I have 3 frigates with no fuel, a battalion of starving soldiers, and a mountain of ice. The war is over. We lost. We only lose if we give up," Kalia said, her voice steel. Easy words for a child who ran while her city burned. Harith snapped. Orion stepped forward, his presence filling the room. "Watch your tone, Admiral. She survived. That is the first requirement of victory." Harith looked at the human with disdain. "And who is this? Your pet?" "He is my partner," Kalia said, stepping between them. "And he has saved my life more times than I can count. We are not here to beg. Harith, we are here to fight." Harith leaned back, studying her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the way she held herself not as a pampered heir, but as a survivor. "Very well," he said slowly. "You want to fight? Then prove you can lead." He pressed a button on his desk, bringing up a holographic map of the sector. Varix has a planetary scanner array on the southern peak. It monitors all traffic in this system. As long as it is active, we cannot move our ships, we cannot smuggle in supplies, and we cannot launch an attack. He looked at Kalia. "Disable it. If you can blind Varix's eyes on this world, I will listen to what you have to say. If you fail, well, the cold is a merciful executioner." "I will go," Orion said immediately. "No," Harith cut in. "The princess goes. If she wants to lead my people, she must bleed with them." "I am going with her," Orion stated, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "That is not negotiable," Harith shrugged. "Die together. Then, it matters little to me. The ascent to the southern peak was a journey through hell. The storm had intensified, turning the world into a swirling vortex of white violence." Kalia and Orion moved slowly, tethered together by a high tensile cable. The wind was strong enough to knock a person off their feet, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Kalia's lungs burned with every breath. Her legs felt like lead weights. She had trained in fencing and dance, but she had never climbed a mountain in a blizzard while carrying an explosive charge on her back. Orion was a machine. He broke the trail, kicking footholds into the ice, constantly checking the tension on the rope. He did not speak, but his presence was a steady, grounding force in the chaos. They were halfway to the summit when the whiteout hit. The wind roared like a living thing, slamming into them with hurricane force. Kalia lost her footing. She slid, scrambling for purchase on the slick ice. "Orion!" she screamed, her voice lost in the gale. The rope went taut. Orion had driven his ice axe into the rock, anchoring them. He hauled her back up, his strength defying the elements. "We can't make the summit," he shouted, grabbing her by the harness. "We need shelter." "Now!" "There is no shelter," Kalia yelled back. "It's just rock. I saw a structure on the thermal scans." Orion pointed to the east, into the teeth of the storm. 200 yards. "Move." They stumbled through the blinding snow, bent double against the wind. Kalia's vision was tunneling. Her extremities were going numb. She was just putting one foot in front of the other, driven by the fear of dying on this God-forsaken rock. Then, a shape loomed out of the whiteness. It was a ruin. Massive pillars of black stone rose from the ice, supporting a collapsed roof. It was ancient, older than the war, older than the colony. They scrambled inside, collapsing onto the stone floor. The wind still howled outside, but the thick walls broke its fury. Kalia ripped off her mask, gasping for air. She lay on her back, staring up at the ceiling. Faint, glowing glyphs were carved into the stone, Thrissen's script. She froze. She knew this place. Orion was already moving, pulling a portable heating unit from his pack and setting it up in the corner. The small device hummed to life, casting a warm orange glow against the black stone. "Kalia," Orion said, noticing her stillness. "Are you injured?" She sat up slowly, her eyes tracing the carvings. This is the Temple of the Silent Void." Orion paused. "You know it?" "My father brought me here," she whispered, standing up and walking to the wall. "When I was a child, before the mining guilds came to Zarnix, it was a place of meditation." She touched a carving of a weeping moon. Her fingers trembled. "We stood right here," she said, her voice hollow. "My mother was with us. It was the last trip we took as a family before politics consumed them." Orion watched her. He saw the way her shoulders slumped, the way the royal armor she wore so tightly was cracking under the weight of the memories. He walked over to her, standing close enough to offer warmth but not touching her. Kalia turned to him. Her eyes were swimming with tears. "I wasn't there," she said, the confession spilling out before she could stop it. "When my mother died in the palace, I wasn't there." Orion frowned softly. "You were in the escape tunnel. You couldn't have saved her." "No." She shook her head violently. "I don't mean the attack. I wasn't with her. We had fought that morning. She wanted me to marry a duke from the Outer Rim to secure an alliance. I yelled at her. I told her she was selling me like cattle. I stormed out. A tear escaped, tracking through the frost on her cheek. The last thing I said to my mother was that I hated her duty. And then the bombs fell, and she died thinking I despised her." She covered her face with her hands, her body shaking with deep, racking sobs. The guilt she had carried for months, the secret poison in her heart, was finally out. Orion stood silent for a long moment. The wind shrieked outside, a chorus for her grief. Then he spoke. His voice was low, rougher than usual. "I killed a child," he said. Kalia stopped crying. She lowered her hands, looking at him. Orion was staring at the heating unit, his eyes unfocused. 5 years ago, during the border wars on Epsilon, my squad was pinned down by sniper fire from a village. We called for air support. I gave the coordinates. I authorized the strike. He clenched his jaw, the muscle jumping. The intel was wrong. It wasn't a sniper nest. It was a school. The rebels were using the children as shields, but I didn't know. I just saw the tracers. I just wanted to get my men out alive." He looked at her then, and the pain in his eyes was a mirror of her own. It was a deep, ancient wound that would never fully heal. "I walked through the rubble afterward," Orion whispered. "I saw what I had done. That was the day I resigned my commission. That was the day I decided I would never follow an order blindly again." He stepped closer to her. "We all carry ghosts. Kalia, the war makes monsters of us all. But your mother knew you loved her. Mothers always know. Just like I know that my guilt doesn't bring those kids back. It just keeps me from making the mistake again." Kalia looked at him. She saw the soldier who carried the weight of the dead, and the man who had chosen to save her to balance the scales. He was broken, just like her. And in that brokenness, she found something she hadn't expected. She found a home. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his chest. The heavy fabric of his combat suit was cold, but the man beneath it was burning. "Orion," she breathed. He looked down at her hand, then up to her face. The air in the temple shifted. The cold receded. "You stayed," she said softly. You stayed when the universe turned its back. You stayed when I pushed you away. I told you, he murmured, his voice straining. I'm not leaving. Kalia stepped in. The distance between them vanished. Then don't, she whispered. She reached up and pulled his face down to hers. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear of duty or poison. She kissed him with everything she had, all the grief, all the rage, all the desperate need to feel alive in a galaxy that wanted them dead. Orion made a sound deep in his throat, a growl of surrender. His arms went around her, crushing her against him. He lifted her, carrying her toward the firelight, his mouth never leaving hers. They sank to the stone floor, a tangle of limbs in heavy winter gear. Layers were stripped away, parkas, boots, armor, until there was only skin and heat. When his hands touched her bare skin, the reaction was blinding. Kalia's bioluminescence flared, not with the soft teal of calm or the gray of fear, but with a brilliant, pulsating violet, the color of deep, resonating love. The light from her skin illuminated the ancient temple, casting long, dancing shadows against the carvings. The markings on her back, her arms, her thighs, swirled and shifted, responding to his touch as if he were painting with light. Orion paused, staring down at her. He looked at the glowing patterns on her skin, his expression one of reverence. You are beautiful, he rasped. Kalia reached up, tracing the scar on his eyebrow, then running her hands through his hair. She pulled him down. Make me forget, she whispered against his lips. Make me forget the war. They made love with a slow, intense desperation. It was not just physical. It was a reclaiming. In the ruins of her ancestors, surrounded by ice and death, they claimed each other. Every touch was a promise. Every breath was a defiance of the void outside. As the climax took them, Kalia arched against him, her light flaring so bright it was like a star being born in the darkness. She dug her nails into his shoulders, anchoring herself to the only solid thing left in her world. You are mine now, she whispered, her voice fierce, possessing. Even if the galaxy burns. Orion buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her, and held her as the light slowly faded to a soft, steady hum. The morning light that filtered through the cracks in the temple roof was gray and unforgiving. The storm had broken, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and judgmental. Kalia woke first. She lay there for a moment, the warmth of Orion's body pressed against her back. His arm was draped over her waist, holding her even in sleep. For a few seconds, she allowed herself to just be a woman in the arms of a man she loved. Then, the memory of the mission rushed back. The scanner, Harith, Varix. The princess returned. She sat up, moving carefully to disengage from his embrace. She reached for her clothes, her movements stiff. The shame was not for what they had done. She could not regret that, but for the vulnerability she had shown. She had laid her soul bare. She had given him the power to destroy her. Orion shifted. He woke instantly, his training overriding his slumber. He sat up, rubbing a hand over his face. Kalia, he said, his voice rough with sleep. She didn't look at him. She was pulling on her thermal undershirt, focusing intently on the fasteners. The storm has cleared, she said, her voice brisk, professional. We have a window to reach the summit. We need to move before the patrols resume. Orion paused. He looked at her back, seeing the tension in her shoulders. He saw the way she was rebuilding the walls he had torn down the night before. Kalia, he said softly. About last night. We did what we needed to do to survive the cold. She interrupted, grabbing her parka. It was a reaction to stress, adrenaline. She stood up and finally turned to look at him. Her face was composed, her markings dim and controlled. We have a mission. Orion. That is all that matters. Orion stood up slowly. He was naked, unashamed, standing in the ruins like a statue of a fallen god. He looked her dead in the eye. Is that all it was? He asked quietly. A reaction to stress? Kalia flinched. She couldn't hold his gaze. She looked at the floor, at the spot where they had lain together. I cannot afford to be distracted, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I cannot afford to be weak. Loving someone isn't a weakness. Kalia. It is when you have a target on your back, she snapped. She turned away, grabbing her gear. Get dressed, soldier. That is an order. Orion didn't argue. He didn't fight her. He simply watched her for a moment, a sadness in his eyes that cut deeper than anger. Yes, Your Highness, he said. The destruction of the scanner array was clinical in its execution. They reached the summit 2 hours later. The facility was guarded by a skeleton crew who had been expecting the storm to last another day. Kalia and Orion moved like a single organism. Orion took out the sentries with silenced shots, clearing a path. Kalia rigged the thermal charges on the main power coupling. There were no words spoken between them, just hand signals and nods. The intimacy of the night before had been replaced by a cold, hard efficiency. They blew the array. The explosion sent a plume of fire into the gray sky, a beacon that could be seen for miles. The eye of Varix was blind. The return to the base was greeted with a different kind of silence. When Kalia walked into the command center, Harith was standing. The skepticism was gone from his face, replaced by a grudging respect. The scanner is down, Kalia said, throwing her empty pack onto the table. Your ships are free to move. Harith nodded. You have done what I thought impossible. You have the blood of the kings in you after all. He gestured to the chairs. Sit. We have much to discuss, and none of it is good. Kalia and Orion sat. The distance between their chairs was significant. My intelligence network is shattered, Harith began, activating the holotable. But before the blackout, we received a data packet from an operative in the capital. A schematic appeared in the air. It looked like a crown, but it was woven with intricate circuitry and neural interfaces. What is that? Kalia asked, leaning forward. It is a psionic amplifier, Harith said grimly. Based on forbidden technology from the Age of Silence. Varix has not just seized the throne. Princess, he intends to enslave the minds of the court. Kalia felt the blood drain from her face. Mind control? Harith nodded. He calls it the Unity Protocol. He has invited the remaining nobles and the exiled senators to a peace summit on the neutral world of Valen. He claims he wants to form a new coalition government. It's a trap, Orion said, his voice flat. Of course it is a trap, Harith agreed. He plans to use the device at the summit. Once he places the amplifiers on the key leaders, he will control the Senate, the military, and the banks. He won't just be a usurper, he will be a god. Kalia stared at the spinning image of the device. It was monstrous. It was the end of free will for her people. When is the summit? She asked. 4 days later, Harith replied. Kalia stood up. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. Then we have 4 days to get to Valen. Harith looked at her. You cannot stop this alone. Valen will be crawling with his elite guard. I don't intend to stop it alone, Kalia said. I intend to walk right into the summit. I am the rightful heir. If he wants a show, I will give him one. She looked at Orion. Ready the ship. We are leaving within the hour. Orion stood. He didn't salute. He didn't say, yes, Your Highness. He just looked at her with that intense, unwavering slate-gray gaze. "I'm already packed," he said. Kalia turned back to the map, planning the death of her cousin's ambitions while her heart, hidden beneath layers of armor and duty, silently screamed for the man standing just out of reach. The hyperspace tunnel was a kaleidoscope of violence, a swirling vortex of indigo and violet that mirrored the bruising on Princess Kalia's soul. She sat in the co-pilot's seat of the Vagabond, polishing the ceremonial dagger she had recovered from the bottom of her pack. It was a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. Swipe, check, swipe, check. Orion Cade sat 3 feet away, piloting the ship with the steady hands of a man who had long ago decided that panic was a luxury he could not afford. He had not spoken to her in 4 hours. The silence between them was not the comfortable quiet of the temple on Zarnix. It was a heavy, suffocating weight, built brick by brick from her own fear. Since leaving the ice world, Kalia had rebuilt the walls around her heart. She had told herself it was necessary. She was about to walk into the viper's nest. She was about to face the man who had murdered her parents. She needed to be the Diamond Queen, cold and unbreakable. Love, she reasoned, was a fissure in the diamond. Love was a leverage point Varix could exploit. So she had pushed Orion away. She had treated him like a guard, a tool, a subordinate. She saw the hurt in his slate-gray eyes every time she issued a curt order, but she forced herself to look past it. It was better he hated her and survived than love her and die. "We are reverting to real space in 5 minutes, Orion said, his voice flat. "Valen approach control is hailing us." Kalia did not look up from the blade. "Do we have the codes?" "Transmitting now," Orion replied. "We are registered as the trade delegation from the Outer Rim Guild of Cygnus. It is a low-level cover, but it should get us past the perimeter." "Good." Kalia finally sheathed the dagger. "Remember, Orion, you are my bodyguard. Nothing more. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not engage unless I am in immediate physical danger." Orion turned his chair slowly. He looked at her, his face a mask of professional detachment that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know the mission." "Kalia." She flinched at the use of her name, wanting to correct him, to demand he use her title to keep the distance safe. But the words died in her throat. She nodded stiffly and turned to the viewport. The stars stretched back into pinpoints of light. The planet Valen loomed ahead, a lush green and gold marble known across the galaxy as the playground of the elite. It was a neutral world, a place where wars were discussed over crystal flutes of champagne and treaties were signed in ink made from rare squid. It was beautiful, and Kalia hated it. They landed in a private hangar reserved for minor dignitaries. The air that rushed in when the ramp lowered was perfumed with jasmine and money. It made Kalia sick. She stood, smoothing the front of the heavy velvet gown she had fabricated from the ship's emergency synthesis unit. It was a dark, midnight blue, high-collared and severe, designed to hide the glow of her markings should her emotions betray her. A heavy veil covered her hair. Orion stepped up beside her. He was wearing the dress uniform of a guild enforcer, black synthetic leather, high boots, a disruption pistol strapped to his thigh. He looked dangerous. He looked perfect. "Ready?" he asked. Kalia took a breath, inhaling the scent of the enemy. "No, but let us go anyway." The Grand Summit Hall was a cavernous space of glass and steel, suspended over a roaring waterfall. The noise of the water was drowned out by the chatter of 1,000 politicians, arms dealers, and nobles. Light refracted through the crystal chandeliers, casting shattered rainbows across the floor. Kalia and Orion moved through the crowd like sharks in a reef, Kalia kept her head bowed slightly, playing the part of a modest guild representative, but her eyes were sharp, scanning every face. She saw senators who had sworn loyalty to her father now laughing with Varix's generals. She saw trade barons who had profited from the blockade of Thrissa. "They are all vultures," she whispered. "Keep moving," Orion murmured, stepping close to her side to block a drunken diplomat from stumbling into her. "The main reception is on the upper terrace. That is where Varix will be." They made their way toward the lift, but their path was blocked by a group of young nobles lounging on a cluster of silk divans. Kalia froze. In the center of the group, holding court with a glass of blue wine, was Lord Jackson. He had been her betrothed once, a political match arranged by the Senate when she was 16. He was a man of soft hands and softer morals, a creature who lived for validation. He wore the crest of the new regime on his lapel, a stylized sun that looked more like a burning eye. Orion sensed her tension. He moved to intercept, but Jackson had already seen them. Well, Jackson drawled, standing up. His voice was slurred, his eyes bright with chemical stimulants. "What have we here? A guild rat in a queen's dress?" He stepped into their path, flanked by two of his personal guards. Kalia kept her head down. "Excuse us, my lord. We are expected above." Jackson laughed. He reached out, his fingers twitching toward her veil. "I know that voice. It sounds like a ghost." Orion stepped forward. His movement was subtle, a shifting of weight that placed him directly between Jackson and Kalia. "Step aside, sir," Orion said. His tone was polite, but it carried the unmistakable threat of violence. Jackson sneered, looking Orion up and down. "And who is this? The mongrel who holds the leash? Tell me, guard, does she still cry when it storms?" Kalia felt a cold rage crystallize in her stomach. He knew who she was, and he was going to expose her right here on the floor, not for justice, but for the sport of it. Jackson stepped around Orion, ignoring the threat, and grabbed Kalia's wrist. "Let's see the face of the traitor, shall we?" Kalia did not pull away. She did not tremble. Instead, she looked up, her eyes locking onto his. Beneath the veil, her violet eyes burned with a ferocity that made Jackson falter. Orion's hand moved. It was a blur. He seized Jackson's wrist, his grip crushing the bones together. Jackson yelped, dropping his wine glass. It shattered on the marble floor, a gunshot sound that silenced the nearby conversations. "I said," Orion whispered, his face inches from the nobles, "step aside." Jackson's guards reached for their weapons, but Orion already had his free hand on his pistol. The standoff lasted a heartbeat. Kalia stepped forward. She placed a hand on Orion's chest, not to stop him, but to claim the moment. She lifted her veil. The gasps rippled through the crowd. Her hair was tied back, but the bioluminescent strands pulsed with a hard, white light, the color of diamond. "Hello, Jackson," she said softly. Her voice carried through the silence. Jackson stared at her, clutching his bruised wrist. "Kalia, you're supposed to be dead. I am disappointed incarnate," she replied. She stepped closer to him, forcing him to back away. "You call me a traitor, yet you wear the badge of the man who burned our capital. You drink wine while our people starve in camps. You are not a lord, Jackson. You are a pet, and your master is calling." She gestured to the upper terrace, where Varix had just appeared, looking down at the commotion. Jackson turned pale. He looked from Kalia to Orion, realizing he was outmatched in spirit and in strength. He muttered a curse and retreated, his friends scattering like roaches in the light. Kalia turned to Orion. Her heart was hammering, but she kept her face impassive. "Clear a path," she ordered. Orion looked at her, a mixture of pride and frustration warring in his eyes. He nodded once, turning his back to the staring crowd, and led her to the lift. The private audience chamber was a study in minimalism. White walls, a single black desk, and a view of the planet's golden rings. Varric stood by the window. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a weary statesman, dressed in simple gray robes. When the doors opened, he turned and smiled. It was the same smile he had worn at her 10th birthday party. "Cousin," he said warmly. "You are late?" Kaelia walked into the room, Orion a shadow at her heel. "Varix," she greeted him, her voice devoid of emotion. "You have done well for yourself. The genocide suits you," Varix chuckled, walking over to pour 2 drinks. He offered one to her. She ignored it. Genocide is such an ugly word. "Kaelia, I prefer restructuring. The Senate was rotting. The houses were parasitic. I simply cut out the infection so the body could heal. By killing my parents? By slaughtering millions?" "Necessary sacrifices," Varric said, taking a sip. "Your father was a good man, but he was weak. He wanted peace at the cost of progress. I want to order, and order requires a strong hand." He set the glass down and looked at her. "I knew you would come. I let you pass the perimeter. I let you humiliate Jackson downstairs. I wanted to see if you had the fire. And you do." Varix walked around the desk, leaning against it. "You are not the girl who ran away anymore. You are a queen without a crown. And that is why I have a proposition." He tapped a console on his desk. A holographic projection filled the room. It showed the galaxy, divided into sectors. "The device I am demonstrating tomorrow, the Unity Protocol, is not just a weapon. It is a tool for unification. It suppresses dissent. It harmonizes thought. No more civil wars, no more bickering senates, just one vision." He looked at her, his eyes gleaming. "I cannot rule alone, Kaelia. The people fear me, but they love you. They remember the Varel name. Stand with me. Be my co-regent. You can have the throne. You can have the adoration of the masses. All I ask is that you help me activate the protocol." Kaelia stared at the map. It was a cage, a gilded galaxy-sized cage. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Varric shrugged. "Then you die. Here. Today." And I found another symbol to use. Perhaps a clone. Perhaps a martyr. Kaelia felt Orion's hand twitch toward his gun. She signaled him to stand down with a subtle movement of her fingers. She had to buy time. Harith needed the coordinates of the device's power source. She needed to know when the activation sequence would begin. "Join you," she mused, walking toward the window, a united galaxy. "Peace. It is what my father wanted." She turned to look at him, forcing her markings to dim, simulating a calming of her spirit. "If I agree, what happens to the rebels? To Harith? Amnesty," Varix lied. She knew it was a lie. He knew she knew. But it was the dance of politics. "And the device? When does it go online?" "Tomorrow at noon," Varric said. "During the closing ceremony, the signal will propagate through the relay network. By sunset, every leader in this system will be aligned." Kaelia nodded slowly. She walked back to him, extending her hand. "I need tonight to think. Cousin, it is a heavy choice." Varix took her hand. His skin was cold. "Take the night, Kaelia. You are staying in the royal suite. I have cleared the floor. No guards, just family." He squeezed her hand. "Don't disappoint me. I would hate to burn the rest of the family tree." The royal suite was a palace within a palace, silk drapes, marble baths, and a balcony that overlooked the glittering city. Kaelia walked in and immediately swept the room for bugs. She used a small scanner from her belt, moving silently from lamp to table. "Clean," she whispered. She collapsed onto the sofa, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. She felt dirty. Varix's touch lingered on her skin like oil. Orion stood by the door, locking it. He checked the perimeter sensors, then turned to face her. He didn't take off his jacket. He didn't relax. He vibrated with a tension that had been building for days. "You are considering it," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Kaelia looked up, startled by the venom in his voice. "What?" "No. I was buying time. Orion." He told me the time. Noon. Tomorrow. You let him touch you. Orion spat. You stood there and listened to him justify murdering your parents, and you nodded. You shook his hand. "It is called diplomacy," Kaelia snapped. "Standing up. It is called playing the game. It's called lying, and you are getting too good at it." Orion crossed the room in 3 long strides. He looked furious, not the cold, professional anger of a soldier, but the hot, messy rage of a man pushed to his limit. "I watched you downstairs with Jackson," he said. "You enjoyed it. You enjoyed the power. And then with Varix. I saw you calculate. I saw you weigh the crown against the cost." "I have to weigh it," she shouted back. "I am responsible for an entire civilization. I am not just a woman. Orion, I am a symbol." "And what about us?" Orion yelled. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. Kaelia froze. "Us?" Orion ripped the guild badge off his chest and threw it across the room. "Yes, us. The 2 people who froze in a temple on Zarnix. The 2 people who bled together in the snow. Does that mean anything to you? Or was that just another transaction? Was I just another asset you needed to secure?" "Orion, stop," she whispered, backing away. "No, I am done stopping. I am done being your silent shadow." He stepped closer, his chest heaving. "I gave up my planet for you, Kaelia. I gave up my rank, my home, my citizenship. I have a death warrant on 12 systems because of you. I would die for you without blinking." He slammed his hand against the wall, shaking a painting. "But you won't even see me. You look right through me like I'm furniture. You build these walls and you pretend you're ice. But I know you're not. I know who you are. Why are you terrified to let me in?" Kaelia trembled. The royal mask crumbled into dust. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the agony she had caused. She saw a man who had stripped himself of everything to be her shield, and she had thanked him by treating him like a servant. I'm afraid she choked. Afraid of what? That I'll leave? "No!" she screamed, tears finally spilling over. "I'm afraid that if I look at you, if I really look at you, I won't be able to do what I have to do." She grabbed the front of his jacket, pulling him down to her level. "I am going to die tomorrow. Orion." Orion went still. "What?" "The device," she sobbed. "Varix's code is based on royal biometrics, Harith told me. The only way to shut it down permanently is to overload the core with a command sequence from a living Varel. It requires a direct neural link. It burns out the nervous system." She looked into his eyes, her soul laid bare. "I am going to sacrifice myself to stop him. That is why I pushed you away. Because I couldn't bear to say goodbye if we were us." Orion stared at her. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a horror that slowly morphed into a fierce, unbreakable resolve. He reached up and cupped her face. His hands were shaking. "You think I'm going to let you do that alone?" he whispered. "You have to," she cried. "You have to live. Someone has to remember me." "No." Orion shook his head. Orion shook his arm. He pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her so tight it was hard to breathe. He buried his face in her hair. "We do this together. We find another way. There is no other way. Then we make one. Orion pulled back, holding her shoulders. He looked at her with an intensity that burned. I am an engineer. Kalia. I fix broken things. We will hack the link. We will share the load. But you are not dying. Not on my watch. Kalia looked at him. She saw the stubbornness that had dragged her through the ruins of Thrissa, through the storms of Zarnix. I see you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I see you. Orion. She reached up and touched his cheek. I was just afraid that if you saw what was left of me, the fear, the weakness, you would run. Orion kissed her palm. I'm not running, he said. I'm right here. He pulled her into a kiss, soft, salty with tears, and full of a promise that defied the odds. It was a pact. We survived, he murmured against her lips. Both of us. Kalia nodded, burying her face in his chest. The walls were gone. She was terrified, yes, but for the first time since the war began, she wasn't lonely. Let's burn his kingdom down, she whispered. Orion smiled, a grim, dangerous expression. I'll get the matches. The morning of the summit dawned bright and clear. The sun of Valen rose over the golden towers, unaware that it was illuminating a battlefield. Kalia stood on the balcony, dressed in her armor. Not the ceremonial robes of a princess, but the combat mesh of a resistance fighter. She had modified the dress, tearing away the heavy velvet skirt to reveal the tactical trousers beneath. Orion stood beside her, checking the charge on his rifle. Varix expects a princess, Kalia said, braiding her hair back, her markings glowing with a steady, focused teal light. Orion racked the slide of his weapon. Let's give him a warrior. They moved to the door. The time for hiding was over. They had a date with destiny at noon, and they intended to be punctual. The jagged shadow of the moon, Selene, fell across the viewport of the vagabond like a funeral shroud. Below them, the sprawling complex of the lunar relay station glittered with malevolent intent. It was a fortress of black steel and ancient Thrissan crystal, a monument to the corruption Varix had brought to the galaxy. Kalia sat in the co-pilot seat, her hands flying across the tactical display. Her face was pale, illuminated by the harsh red light of the proximity alarms. They had left the summit on Valen hours ago, slipping away the moment Harith's intelligence confirmed the true location of the signal source. The summit was merely the theater. This moon was the weapon. Orion fought the controls of the freighter, his jaw set in a line of granite. The ship shook violently as flak cannons from the surface opened fire. Shields are at 30%, Orion shouted over the roar of the engines. We are not going to find a landing pad. I have to put us down in the maintenance trench. Do it, Kalia commanded. Her voice was steady, stripped of all fear. She was no longer the princess who wept in the rain. She was a weapon pointed at the heart of her cousin's ambition. Orion banked the ship hard. The vagabond groaned, metal screaming under the G-force. They dove into the artificial canyon of the station's infrastructure, dodging pipe networks and cooling towers. The flak fire chased them, explosions blossoming against the canyon walls like deadly flowers. Brace for impact, Orion warned. He flared the thrusters at the last second, killing their momentum. The ship slammed into the deck of a lower cargo platform. The landing gear collapsed with a sickening crunch of tearing metal, and the vessel skidded across the ferrocrete, sparks showering the hull like fireworks. When the motion stopped, silence rushed back in, heavy and ringing. Orion unbuckled instantly. He checked his rifle, racked the slide, and looked at her. We have 10 minutes before the security teams converge on this crash site. Kalia grabbed her pack, containing the interface decoder Harith had built. 10 minutes is a lifetime. Let's move. They blew the airlock and sprinted into the labyrinth of the station. The air here was thin, smelling of ozone and recycled fear. This was where Varix was keeping them, the hundreds of captured nobles, the senators who had refused to bow, the families of the resistance. They were being held in the lower levels, waiting to be turned into puppets. They moved with the efficiency of wolves. Orion took point, his movements fluid and lethal. He silenced 2 guards at a checkpoint with precise suppressed shots before they could even raise the alarm. Kalia followed, stepping over the bodies without looking down. There was no room for pity today. The central control chamber was located at the apex of the station, a massive dome that housed the primary resonance crystal. It was the heart of the Unity Protocol. As they ascended the service lift, the hum of the machine became audible. It was a low, throbbing vibration that Kalia felt in her teeth. It was the sound of 1,000 minds about to be silenced. The lift doors hissed open. They were not in a room. They were in a cathedral of technology. The ceiling arched hundreds of feet above them, dominated by a suspended crystal the size of a dropship. It pulsed with a sickly, corrupted purple light. Beneath it, banks of consoles formed a concentric ring, manned by technicians who looked more like cultists than scientists. And guarding the only bridge to the console were Varix's elite Praetorian Guard, 12 of them, heavily armored, wielding energy pikes and plasma rifles. Orion pulled Kalia back behind a pillar just as a plasma bolt scorched the metal where she had been standing. "They know we are here," Orion said grimly, checking his ammunition counter. Kalia peeked around the edge. "I need to get to the central interface. It is directly under the crystal, and that is a kill box," Orion stated. "There is no cover. Then we make some—" Orion looked at her. He saw the resolve in her violet eyes. He nodded once. "I will draw their fire. When I move, you run. Do not stop. Do not look back. Just get to the console and kill that machine." "Orion, go!" he roared. He broke from cover, sprinting to the left, firing his rifle in controlled bursts. He took down 2 guards in the first second, his shots finding the weak points in their neck armor. The Praetorians turned their focus to him, unleashing a torrent of green plasma fire. Orion dove behind a crate, rolling and coming up firing. He was a whirlwind of violence, a distraction so dangerous they could not ignore him. Kalia ran. She sprinted across the bridge, her boots hammering against the metal. Lasers sizzled past her ear. One clipped her shoulder, burning through her armor. But she did not slow down. She vaulted over the railing of the central platform and slid to her knees in front of the master console. She slammed the decoder onto the interface port. The screen flared to life. Alien script scrolled across the display faster than a human eye could follow. Kalia's fingers danced over the haptic keys, translating the flow of data into music in her mind. This was Thrisson tech. It responded to harmony, to rhythm. Above her, the great crystal screamed. The light shifted from purple to a blinding red. "Alert!" A mechanical voice boomed. "Unauthorized access detected." Orion was shouting something, but Kalia turned him out. She was deep in the code, fighting a digital war against her cousin's architect. She bypassed the first firewall, then the second. She found the activation sequence. It was 90% complete. "I have you," she whispered, her sweat dripping onto the console. She initiated the shutdown command, a sequence of logic that should have shattered the resonance frequency and cracked the crystal. Access denied. Kalia froze. She tried again. Access denied. The screen flashed with a mocking image, the royal seal of House Varel, twisted and inverted. No. She breathed. She frantically searched the code structure, and then she saw it. It was a deadlock trap. Varix had anticipated a hack. He had hard-coded a failsafe that required a biological confirmation. The machine wasn't just looking for a password. It was looking for a pulse. Specifically, it was looking for a corrupted Thrissan pulse to match the frequency of the enslaved nobles. If she tried to override it with her own pure royal DNA, the system would recognize the dissonance and lock her out permanently. The code was corrupted. It was a dead end. Kalia stared at the screen, horror cold in her veins. She couldn't stop it. The countdown timer hit 3 minutes. "Orion!" she screamed, her voice cracking. Orion was pinned down near the entrance, bleeding from a wound in his thigh. He fired a grenade from his underslung launcher, blasting a Praetorian off the walkway, and scrambled toward her. "What is it?" he yelled, sliding in beside her behind the console as sparks rained down on them. "I can't stop it," Kalia cried, typing frantically, looking for a back door that wasn't there. "The code is biologically locked. It needs a neural bridge to ground the energy, or it won't accept the shutdown command. It rejects my DNA because I am not part of the collective." Orion looked at the crystal above them. It was pulsing faster now, a heartbeat of doom. "What kind of bridge?" he asked, reloading his weapon. "A living mind," Kalia said, tears welling in her eyes. "Someone has to physically interface with the core. They have to absorb the feedback loop while I rewrite the protocol from the inside. But the energy, it will burn out the nervous system of any Thrissan who touches it. It's designed to kill the host to protect the program." She looked at him, despair crushing her chest. "We failed. We can't do it." Orion looked at the console. He looked at the raw, exposed cables pulsing with light that ran into the base of the crystal. Then he looked at the approaching guards. "It kills Thrissans because your nerves are conductive to this energy," he said quietly. "Your physiology is based on light and resonance." Kalia blinked. "Yes, I am not Thrissan," Orion said. Kalia went still. "No, Orion, no, I am human," he continued, his voice calm, terrifyingly logical. "My nervous system is dense, insulated. We don't conduct light, we conduct electricity. Orion, stop!" She grabbed his arm. "It will boil your brain. You cannot survive that kind of voltage." "We don't have a choice," he shouted, shaking off her hand. "Look at the timer." "Kalia, 2 minutes. If that thing fires, the galaxy is gone." He stood up, firing 3 rounds at a guard who tried to rush the platform. He dropped back down, his eyes blazing. "Hook me up." "I won't," Kalia sobbed. "I won't kill you. You are not killing me. You are saving them." Orion grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. His hands were bloody, warm, and rough. "Look at me. This is the only way. I act as the ground wire. You rewrite the code while the system tries to process my alien biology. It will buy you the time you need." He turned and ripped the cover off the manual interface port. He grabbed the 2 neural shunts, long, needle-like probes designed to drill into the base of the skull. "Orion, please," she begged, clutching his chest. "We can run. We can fight another day. There is no other day." Orion's voice softened. He looked at her, and for a second, the war vanished. There was only the man who loved her. "If I die," he whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb, "at least it will be as the man who never left your side." Kalia stared at him. She saw the truth in his eyes. He had made this choice the moment he saw the palace fall on Thrissa. He had been walking toward this death for months, just to keep her safe. Her heart broke, shattering into a million sharp pieces. But beneath the heartbreak, the queen rose. She realized he was right. This was the price of the crown. This was the cost of freedom. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was deep, raw, and tasted of salt and ashes. It was a transfer of breath, of soul. "Then live," she whispered against his mouth, fierce and commanding. "You don't get to leave me now. That is an order. Soldier." Orion smiled, a small, sad, beautiful thing. "Yes, Your Highness." He turned away. He jammed the neural shunts into the interface ports on his neck. The reaction was instantaneous. Orion arched his back, his entire body seizing as the connection slammed into him. He didn't just scream, he roared. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, a sound that tore at the fabric of the room. The crystal above them turned white. Kalia didn't look away. She couldn't. She forced her hands back to the keyboard. The system was screaming too. "Error. Incompatible biology detected. Foreign organism." The deadlock was broken. The system was so focused on trying to purge the human anomaly that the firewall dropped. Kalia drove her code into the opening like a spear. She bypassed the security protocols. She accessed the core targeting matrix. Orion was convulsing on the floor. Smoke was rising from the interface points on his neck. His skin was turning a terrifying shade of gray, his veins standing out like black ropes. He was burning from the inside out. "Hold on," Kalia screamed, typing faster than she ever had in her life. "Just hold on." She reached the final command sequence, but the system fought back. The corruption Varix had planted lashed out, trying to sever Orion's connection, trying to kill the host to save the weapon. The crystal flared. A shockwave of psionic energy blasted outward, knocking the approaching guards off their feet. Orion's roar faded to a gurgle. He was dying. The energy was too much. His human resilience was failing. Kalia saw his vital signs on the monitor plummet. His heart was stopping. No. She couldn't just rewrite the code. She needed to support him. She needed to share the load. She remembered the temple. She remembered the way her light had merged with his. Kalia abandoned the keyboard. She threw herself onto Orion's body. She didn't try to disconnect him. She grabbed the cables, wrapping her hands around the exposed conductors. Pain, white-hot and absolute, shot up her arms. It felt like her bones were turning to liquid glass. But she didn't let go. She activated her bioluminescence, pushing every ounce of her royal energy, every drop of her Thrissan heritage, into the connection. She wasn't trying to fight the machine. She was trying to complete the circuit. "I am Kalia of House Varel," she screamed into the mind link. "And you will not take him." Her violet light exploded outward, blindingly bright. It rushed into the cables, mixing with the red, raw bioelectricity of Orion's nervous system. Blue and red collided. Purple fire engulfed them both. The system couldn't handle it. It couldn't handle the impossible fusion of Thrissan royal code and human stubbornness. It couldn't process love. The feedback loop reversed. Instead of draining Orion, the crystal began to crack. A spiderweb of fractures appeared on its surface. The humming turned into a screech of dying metal. Kalia felt Orion's heart stutter against her chest. She poured more light into him. "Live, live, live." The monitor flashed. "Critical failure. Core overload. Get down!" Kalia screamed, though there was no one left to hear. She curled her body around Orion's, shielding him with her own flesh, burying her face in his neck as the world turned white. The explosion was not of fire, but of pure sonic force. The great crystal shattered. Shards of psychic-infused glass the size of houses rained down. The shockwave blew out the windows of the observation deck, venting the atmosphere into the void until the emergency force field snapped into place. The Praetorian guards were thrown like ragdolls against the walls. The consoles sparked and died. The humming stopped. Silence returned to the citadel of whispers. But this time, it was the silence of a tomb. Dust motes danced in the emergency lighting that flickered overhead. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and burnt copper. Kalia coughed, the sound racking her bruised ribs. She pushed a piece of debris off her legs, a metal panel from the console that had sheltered them from the worst of the blast. She was alive. Her armor was shredded, her skin scorched, but she was alive. Orion. She scrambled around in the darkness, her hands searching frantically. Orion. He was lying on his back amidst a pile of crystal shards. He was impossibly still. The neural shunts had been ripped from his neck by the force of the blast, leaving 2 dark, cauterized wounds. Kalia crawled over to him. She placed her ear against his chest. Nothing. No. She shook him. No, you don't. You don't get to do this. She placed her hands on his chest and began compressions. She didn't know the proper rhythm for a human heart, so she just pushed with the rhythm of her own desperation. Breathe, she commanded, slapping his face. Damn you. Orion, breathe. She pumped his chest, once, twice, 3 times. She leaned down and breathed air into his lungs. She tasted the blood in his mouth. Come back to me, please. I can't do this alone. I can't be the queen without you. She pumped again. Her arms screamed in protest. Her energy was depleted. Her bioluminescence was a faint, flickering ember. She hit his chest hard, a hammer blow of frustration and grief. Orion gasped. It was a terrible, ragged sound, like air rushing into a vacuum. His body arched off the floor. He coughed violently, rolling onto his side, retching. Kalia collapsed back on her heels, covering her mouth with her hands, sobbing with a relief so profound it felt like pain. Orion continued to cough, his body shaking. He didn't open his eyes. He curled into a fetal position, groaning. Kalia reached out and touched his shoulder. He flinched, his muscles rigid. Orion? She whispered. He didn't answer. He was unconscious, trapped somewhere in the dark corridor between pain and waking. But his heart, his stubborn human heart, was beating. Kalia looked around the ruined control center. The crystal was gone. The device was destroyed. The nobles on the moon below were waking up from a nightmare they would never fully understand. She had won. Varix's plan was ash. But looking at the broken man on the floor, the man who had acted as the lightning rod for her vengeance, Kalia felt no triumph. She felt only a fierce, protective savagery. She stood up, her legs shaking. She grabbed Orion's arm and draped it over her shoulder. She wasn't strong enough to carry him, but she would drag him if she had to. She would drag him through hell. We are going home, she whispered into his ear, though he couldn't hear her. She began the long, slow walk back to the lift, leaving the ruins of the Unity Protocol behind them, a queen carrying her king through the wreckage of the world they had saved. The medical bay of the Vagabond was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of the biomonitor. It had been 3 days since the explosion on Selene. They were drifting in deep space, hidden in the debris field of a dead comet to mask their signature. Kalia sat by the biobed. She had not slept. She had barely eaten. She had spent every hour tending to the burns on Orion's skin, flushing the toxins from his blood, and watching the brainwave monitor for signs of permanent damage. The diagnostics were confusing. His physical wounds were healing with that terrifying human speed she had come to admire. But his mind. The readings were erratic, spikes of activity followed by deep, comatose troughs. She held his hand. It was limp, callous, and familiar. You need to wake up, she said softly to the silence. The galaxy is falling apart out there. Varix has fled Valen. The Senate is in chaos. They are calling for me. She traced the lines of his palm. They want the Diamond Queen, but I don't want to be her. Not without you. Orion didn't stir. Kalia leaned her head on the mattress. She felt a deep, encroaching exhaustion. She closed her eyes just for a moment. I lost everything in the war, she thought, the old mantra playing in her head. But then she felt the faint squeeze of fingers against hers. Her head snapped up. Orion's eyes were still closed, but his hand was gripping hers. Weakly, tremulously. But he was holding on. Orion? His eyelids fluttered. They opened a fraction. The slate-gray irises were cloudy, unfocused, drugged with pain and trauma. He looked at the ceiling, then slowly, painfully, rolled his eyes to find her face. He blinked, trying to clear the fog. His lips moved. No sound came out. He swallowed dryly and tried again. Did we win? His voice was a ruin, a whisper of gravel and glass. Kalia let out a laugh that sounded like a sob. Tears spilled down her face, glowing softly with her relief. Yes, she said, squeezing his hand with both of hers. Yes. Orion. We won. The device is gone. He closed his eyes again, a faint exhale escaping his lips. Good, he rasped. He drifted back into sleep, but the grip on her hand didn't loosen. It stayed firm. An anchor. Kalia stayed there, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The war wasn't over. Varix was still out there. The galaxy was still broken. But as she sat in the dim light of the medbay, Kalia knew the truth. The hardest battle was already won. He hadn't left her. She leaned forward and kissed his forehead, right above the scar. Rest now, she whispered. I'll take the first watch. Consciousness returned to Orion Cade not as a flood, but as a slow, agonizing tide rising over jagged rocks. First came the sound. It was a rhythmic, synthetic chirping, synchronized with the dull throb in his chest. Then came the smell, the sharp chemical scent of Bacta fluid and sterile air filtration. Finally, sensation crept back into his limbs, heavy and foreign, as if his body belonged to someone else and he was merely borrowing it. He tried to open his eyes. The light was blinding, a harsh white glare that sent spikes of pain drilling into his skull. He groaned, a dry, raspy sound that scraped against his throat like sandpaper. Easy, soldier. The voice was soft, familiar, and laced with an exhaustion that mirrored his own. Orion blinked, forcing his eyes to adjust. The blur of white slowly coalesced into shapes. A biobed, a monitor, a figure sitting in a chair beside him, leaning forward with elbows resting on knees. Kalia. She looked different. The royal armor was gone, replaced by a simple gray tunic and loose trousers. Her hair was unbraided, falling in loose, silver waves around her shoulders. But it was her face that held his attention. It was thinner, the cheekbones sharper, and there were dark circles under her violet eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Yet, her markings, the bioluminescent patterns that traced her skin, were glowing with a steady, warm teal light. You're awake, she whispered, a smile breaking through the fatigue. Orion tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. His muscles felt like water. He settled for turning his head, the movement sending a fresh wave of dizziness washing over him. How long? He rasped. 3 weeks later. Kalia answered. She reached out, picking up a cup of water with a straw and bringing it to his lips. Drink. Slowly. The cool liquid was a blessing. Orion drank greedily until she pulled the cup away. 3 weeks later. He repeated the words, feeling heavy on his tongue. I missed the war. The war is over. Orion. Kalia set the cup down and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, grounding him in the reality of the room. The explosion on the moon destroyed the Unity protocol. The feedback loop shattered the crystal. Orion closed his eyes, flashes of memory bombarding him. The control room, the searing pain of the neural spike, the feeling of his mind being flayed open by raw energy. And then, the light. Her light. You saved me, he murmured. I felt you, inside the interface. Kalia squeezed his hand. You were acting as a ground wire for enough psionic energy to level a city. I simply shared the load. She said it casually, as if she hadn't risked lobotomizing herself to pull him back from the brink. Orion looked at her, seeing the truth in the way her gaze lingered on his face. She had dragged him out of the fire. Where are we? The Resolute, Kalia said. Admiral Harith's flagship. We are currently holding orbit in the Valence system. Orion frowned, the soldier in him trying to piece together the tactical situation. Harith? The rebels came out of hiding? They didn't have a choice. When the device exploded, the psychic shockwave knocked every noble on the moon unconscious. But it also broke the conditioning Varix had already started. When they woke up, they knew everything. They knew he had tried to enslave them. She leaned back, a shadow crossing her face. Varix fled, his fleet fractured. Half of his captains surrendered immediately when Harith arrived. The other half ran for the outer rim. The Senate is in chaos, but it is a free chaos. Orion exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. It was done. The mission he had sacrificed his life for was complete. So, he said, looking at the ceiling, you won. We won, Kalia corrected him. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in her tunic. Rest now. The doctors say your neural pathways are regenerating, but you need sleep. She turned to leave, but Orion tightened his grip on her hand. Kalia. She stopped, looking back at him. Are you okay? She hesitated. For a brief second, the mask of the strong leader slipped, revealing a profound uncertainty. I am alive, she said simply, and you are alive. For now, that is enough. Recovery was a slow, frustrating process. Orion spent the next week relearning how to walk without stumbling. His nervous system was still misfiring, sending phantom tremors through his hands. But the doctors assured him it was temporary. During his rehabilitation, he watched the news feeds. The galaxy was reshaping itself with terrifying speed. The images of the ruined moon were everywhere. So were the images of Kalia. She was being hailed as the savior of the Senate, the Diamond Queen, the surviving nobles. The very people who had scorned her as a traitor weeks ago were now clamoring for her return. They needed a symbol to unite the fractured systems. And Kalia Varel was the only legitimate heir left standing. Orion watched a broadcast of a rally in the capital world. Thousands of people were chanting her name. They waved banners with the crest of House Varel. He turned the screen off, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He was a mercenary, a deserter, a man with a bounty on his head and a nervous system held together by luck and alien medicine. She was a queen. The war had brought them together, leveled the playing field in the mud and the snow. But peace? Peace was rebuilding the walls between their worlds. He was doing push-ups in his quarters, sweat dripping onto the metal floor. When the door chimed, "Enter," he grunted, not stopping. The door slid open. It wasn't a nurse, it was Admiral Harith. The old Thrisson looked tired, but his uniform was crisp, pressed, and adorned with new commendations. He watched Orion complete his set before speaking. Your form is improving, Captain Harith observed. Orion stood up, grabbing a towel. I'm not a captain anymore, Admiral. Just a guy trying to get his legs back. Harith walked into the room, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at the small, austere space. You are a hero of the Alliance, Cade. The Senate has already drafted a full pardon for you. Your record with the Terran Coalition will be expunged. You are a free man. Orion wiped his face. That's good to hear. Does that mean I can leave? Harith paused. He looked at Orion with a shrewd, calculating expression. That depends on the princess. What does that mean? Harith sighed, dropping the formal demeanor. The Council of Nobles has formally petitioned Kalia to take the throne. They want her to dissolve the interim government and reinstate the monarchy. With a new constitution, they want her to rule. Orion felt the knot in his stomach tighten. It's what she was born for. Is it? Harith walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. She has not accepted. She has not refused. She has simply waited. She spends her days in the refugee wards, helping the wounded. She avoids the politicians. She refuses to wear the crown they recovered from the ruins. Harith turned back to Orion. She is waiting for you. Cade. Orion laughed, a bitter short sound. Waiting for me to do what? Bow? Carry her train? Don't be an idiot, Harith snapped. You know what she feels for you. I saw the logs from the control center. I saw the energy readings. You two are bonded in a way that makes the old laws irrelevant. But she is a queen, and you are a soldier. If she takes the throne, she cannot have you. Not really. The protocol, the politics, the endless scrutiny, it will destroy whatever you found in the dark. Orion stared at him. Why are you telling me this? Because I owe you, Harith said quietly. And because I believe that Kalia has given enough to this galaxy. She deserves to choose her own cage, or to choose no cage at all. He walked to the door, pausing before he left. She is on the observation deck. Go to her. The observation deck was empty, save for a solitary figure standing against the transparent steel, silhouetted by the swirl of a blue nebula. Orion walked in. The sound of his boots on the deck was the only noise in the vast room. Kalia didn't turn, but he saw her shoulders relax as he approached. She knew his step. Beautiful view, he said, stopping beside her. It is, she agreed. It looks peaceful from here. You can't see the wreckage. Orion looked at her profile. She was staring out at the stars with a hunger he recognized. It was the look of a prisoner gazing through the bars. Harith tells me they offered you the big chair. Orion said. Kalia nodded slowly. They did. Full restoration of House Varel. Executive power over the reconstruction. They even offered to build a statue of you in the central plaza. Orion snorted. I hope they get the nose right. Kalia turned to face him. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes were searching his, looking for the answer to a question she hadn't asked yet. You should take it, Orion said. The words tasted like ash, but he forced them out. You're the only one who can fix this mess. You know the players. You know the game. You can be the queen your father wanted you to be. Is that what you want? Kalia asked softly. It doesn't matter what I want. It matters to me. Orion clenched his jaw. Kalia, look at us. I'm a grunt. You're royalty. We worked in the trenches because we had to survive. But this, the palace, the courts, I don't fit there. I can't be your consort, walking 3 steps behind you, watching you sign treaties while I hold your purse. He looked away, staring at the nebula. If you take the crown, I leave. I take my pardon. I get my ship, and I go find a quiet rock somewhere to disappear. Kalia watched him. She didn't look hurt. She looked resolved. You would leave me? She whispered. I would set you free, Orion corrected. To do your duty. Duty. Kalia tasted the word. She looked down at her hands that were calloused from climbing ice cliffs, scarred from fighting guards, stained with grease and blood. These were not the hands of a diplomat anymore. My father believed in duty. She said, he died for it. My mother believed in tradition. She died for it. I believed in the crown, and I watched my world burn for it. She looked up at Orion, her eyes burning with a fierce, sudden light. I walked through the fire. Orion, I died, in a way. On that moon with you. The girl who wanted to be queen is gone. She burned up in the atmosphere. She reached out and took his hand. I don't want the crown. I don't want the palace. I don't want to rule a galaxy that only loves me when I bleed for it. Orion stared at her, his heart hammering. Then what do you want? Kalia smiled, and it was the first genuine, unburdened smile he had seen since they met. I want to go to that quiet rock you mentioned. I want to build something that is mine. Ours. I want to wake up in the morning and not worry about assassination protocols. I want to plant a garden. I want to live. She stepped closer, interlacing her fingers with his. Harith has a colony transport leaving for the Outer Rim in 2 days. It's heading for a sector that isn't on the maps. A green world, no Senate, no Varix. Just survivors trying to start over. She looked at him with a vulnerability that stole his breath. Take me with you. Orion, please. Orion looked at her. He saw the crown she was rejecting, the power she was walking away from. And he saw the woman who had held him while he screamed, the woman who had rewritten the laws of biology to save his life. He squeezed her hand. It's a one-way trip, Kalia. If you leave, you can never go back. You forfeit the title and you forfeit the legacy. Kalia leaned her forehead against his chest. I have my legacy right here. Orion wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. He buried his face in her hair, smelling the faint scent of ozone and jasmine. Pack your bags, princess, he whispered. We're leaving. 6 months later. The planet did not have a name on any official star chart, but the locals called it Sanctum. It was a world of emerald forests, towering mountain ranges, and oceans the color of crushed sapphires. It was wild, untamed, and beautiful. The settlement lay in a valley protected by the high peaks. It was a patchwork town built from salvaged ship parts and local timber. There were no palaces here. No skyscrapers, just homes built by hands that knew the value of hard work. Kalia stood knee-deep in the soil of her garden, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her forearm. She wore a linen shirt and trousers tucked into heavy work boots. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, glowing softly in the twilight. She was planting tubers, a native vegetable that tasted like sweet potatoes mixed with cinnamon. It was back-breaking work, but she loved it. Every plant she put in the ground was a victory. Every harvest was a promise kept. Hey, you missed a spot. She looked up. Orion was walking up the path from the river, carrying a basket of fresh fish. He was shirtless, his skin tanned from the months under the twin suns. The scars from the neural interface were still visible on his neck, faint white lines that marked him as a survivor. He looked healthy, strong, happy. Kalia threw a clump of dirt at him. He dodged it with a laugh. I am practicing sustainable agriculture, she retorted, leaning on her hoe. You are just harassing the local wildlife. I'm providing dinner. Orion grinned, setting the basket down on the porch of the cabin they had built together. It was a simple structure, made of hand-hewn logs, with a wide deck that looked out over the valley. Kalia walked over to him, peeling off her gloves. She looked at the cabin, at the smoke curling from the chimney of their neighbor's house, a former pirate who was now the town's best carpenter. "It's good," she said softly. "This life, it's quiet," Orion agreed, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her against his side. "No explosions, no speeches. I kind of miss the adrenaline." "Liar." Kalia poked him in the ribs. "You slept until noon yesterday." "I was recovering from roof repairs." Orion kissed the top of her head. "Come on," he said. "Let's go up to the ridge. The suns are setting." They walked up the winding path behind the cabin, hand in hand. The air was cooling as the twin suns, one gold, one red, dipped toward the horizon. The sky was a canvas of impossible colors, bruised purple, burning orange, and a deep, velvety indigo. They reached the cliff's edge, sitting on a flat rock that still held the warmth of the day. Below them, the settlement twinkled with the lights of oil lamps and bioluminescent moss. It was small, insignificant against the vastness of the galaxy, but it was theirs. Orion looked at her. The dying light caught the dirt on her cheek, the loose strands of silver hair, the simple clothes. "You know," he said, a teasing glint in his eyes. "You are a terrible farmer. Your rows are crooked." Kalia laughed, bumping her shoulder against his. "And you are a terrible fisherman. You fell in the river twice last week." "I was diving. It was tactical." Orion smiled, shaking his head. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. "You're not like any princess I imagined," he said softly. "I thought you'd be glass, breakable, cold, but you're dirt and fire." Kalia felt the blush rise to her cheeks, her markings flaring a soft, happy pink. She turned to face him, placing her hand over his heart. She could feel the steady, strong rhythm of it. She thought about the girl who had run from the burning palace. That girl seemed like a stranger now, a ghost from another life. She looked at the man who had carried her through the wreckage, who had given up a universe to plant vegetables with her on a nameless world. She smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears of pure contentment. "You're not like any man I ever dreamed of," she whispered. "I dreamed of princes and admirals. I never dreamed of a soldier who would argue with me about hyperdrive couplings." Orion chuckled, leaning in closer. His forehead rested against hers. "Are you happy, Kalia? Really? Do you miss it? The crown?" Kalia looked out at the valley. She looked at the home they had built. She looked at the man who was her entire world. She shook her head. "I lost everything in the war," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She turned back to him, her violet eyes locking with his slate-gray ones. "My title, my kingdom, my past." She leaned in, her lips brushing his. "I lost everything, except the only one I truly wanted." Orion didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of the future. As the twin suns slipped below the horizon, plunging the world into twilight, Kalia's hair and markings began to glow. The light started as a soft hum, then grew brighter, expanding until they were bathed in a radiant, violet aura. It was a beacon in the darkness, a testament to a love that had survived the end of the world. They sat there on the edge of the universe, two broken pieces that had fit together to make something whole, watching the first stars blink into existence above them. Fade to stars.